Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes, and welcome to the series about anger, which are books Dad picked on a theme, that theme being anger. And like my subtitle says, I really probably need a better title for this. So this is the second book in this series about anger. I'm given to understand that several of these are books that were picked because people got angry about the book, whether the subject matter or something else. So, there's going to be a bunch of these that are on that. This particular book, I read it in this collection, Great Short Works of Stephen Crane, but it was initially published as a standalone book, so in spite of the fact that it is a novella and, thus shorter and so on and so forth, given the number of picture books that I've included in this, I'm willing to consider this a standalone book, even if I haven't read it as a standalone book. And for the record, no, I have not read the other books, the other things written in this particular collection, because that would be reading literature. I only do that if I have to. The book in question is Maggie, a Girl of the Streets. So, I just figured I'd have a book that actually had the title more front and center. Anyways, so I have not read The Afterword with Tom Wolfe, so I have no idea what's in that. Anyways, so Maggie, a Girl of the Streets is like I said, it's a novella. It's like 100 pages. It's not very long. And going into this is a story of a girl and her brother, actually, who are raised in bad circumstances. They're from the wrong side of the tracks. They're in a bad part of town. Their mother is a drunkard, and their father is also a drunkard, and both parents are loud and vaguely abusive and constantly screaming at each other, and they're, nothing is good about where they're living and how they're living or anything else. And so Maggie's brother, Jimmy, grows up to be a swaggering bully boy who basically is one of those people who feels hard done by the universe, which, yes, they are, because people living in extreme poverty usually are hard done by the universe. But he sort of takes it out on everybody around him and basically decides that everybody else is at fault for everything, and becomes one of those people who will run somebody down and then blame the person that he ran over for the fact that he got a dent on the hood of his car, except this is the late 1800s, so there is no car. He is instead running people over with a wagon and then blaming them when his horses get upset. Maggie, in the meantime, grows up very, very pretty, gets herself a job, and the problem is that they're from really, really downtrodden circumstances. They're from, like I said, the bad part of town. Her parents are both awful. And when Jimmy makes a friend, Pete, and Pete comes by, the thing about Pete is she looks at Pete and sees a great sophisticate. And this is one of those relative things where, you're talking about somebody who is from such terrible circumstances that they look at some really, really low-end, middle-brow art and will think that this is incredibly complex, amazing stuff, because they're so poorly off in terms of education, in terms of opportunity, that they have no idea that anything better could be out there. This is like somebody who is looking at, cheap $5 oil paintings that the cheap oil paintings that you find at craft shows, and looks at it and thinks this is the greatest art that ever was, because they have no notion that Da Vinci or Michelangelo or pick your Ninja Turtle or an actual artist of choice, they have no idea that it's that those even exist. Never mind that like anything could be that anything could be better than what they're looking at right now. So she meets Pete. And to her, Pete seems wealthy and sophisticated. He takes her out to the theater. He takes her out to dinner. And the thing is that these places are cheap places. They're places that people who don't have a lot of money go for a good time. But because she is from the bottom barrel poor, she has no concept, and to her this is amazing. And she thinks that she's made it. She thinks that she's found a sophisticated, caring boyfriend, and her mother objects to Pete. Her mother screams her down, and the problem is that her mother, it turns out her mother is right, but her mother has been an abusive, drunken harridan for Maggie's entire life, so Maggie has no reason to listen to her, no reason to believe her, and so Maggie finally just moves out of her home and moves in with Pete, living with him out of wedlock because she thinks this is her opportunity. She thinks that Pete is wonderful. And then Pete turns out to be exactly the same sort of awful person that her brother Jimmy has turned out to be, and he sort of turns her out, shoves her away, tells her, that now that I've gotten what I wanted from you, I don't need you anymore. And Maggie tries to go home, and her mother screams at her and says, I'm not going to let you in. You've thrown all of your purity away, says the screaming, howling, drunken harridan. And Maggie winds up on the streets. She winds up clearly, implicitly becoming a prostitute, and dies young. And the last scene of the book is her mother screaming about how she remembers when she could fit little booties on her daughter's feet, and the whole thing is just this massive, twisting, writhing mess of wasted opportunity, of people who waste their chances, of people who should be better but aren't, and yet they're not better because what opportunity do they have to learn to be better? What chance does anybody have at, giving them that chance? It's the endless cycle of poverty. It's the endless cycle of all sorts of things where you have people who, maybe they could be better, maybe they could make a go of it, but they don't know how, and so everything falls apart again, and somebody sneers down their nose at these people, little realizing that these people wouldn't turn out this way if somebody would give them the time of day. In the course of this book, she tries to go to a local priest or pastor for help, and he just pushes her away and sneers down his nose at her because the author says, and how could he know that her soul needed saving? And so this is a book that not shockingly upset people because, of course, the subject matter is shocking. A girl who turns to prostitution, a girl who leaves home to move in with a man outside of wedlock, but a mother who won't take her own daughter back, who condemns her own daughter out of hand without giving her a chance to be forgiven, a daughter who is not allowed to be a prodigal daughter, a son who is raised in such circumstances that he turns out terribly and who can't think through the complex problem that if his sister is special to him, then surely these other women who he has learned how to use and throw away are special to somebody else, are someone else's sister and daughter. It doesn't occur to him, and Maggie Maggie is ignorant and she doesn't know any better. And so there's a lot in here if you are the moral majority, the angry moral majority. There's a lot in here that can upset you from depicting things in this unforgiving way to having all of these people make all of these terrible decisions. It's a long-term problem a lot of people have when reading fiction. We all hate that thing where we watch somebody who could make better decisions, who should know better, who shouldn't be making those decisions, and they do it anyway. Anakin Skywalker makes those decisions, and we know he shouldn't, and he knows he shouldn't, and yet he does it anyway. There's a million and one of them in fiction. And the thing is that this is a book that is painfully realistic, but at the same time, it's that kind of realism that really rubs your nose in it and also makes most of the people in this book, insupportable as like you can't stand them, because Jimmy and Maggie's parents are awful and you just want to shake them, and Jimmy turns out awful and you just want to shake him for not for acting like that, because seriously he could do better. You want to shake Maggie for looking at Pete and thinking that he's amazing and wonderful when it is so clear that he is an ignorant, awful person who's taking advantage of her. You want to yell at the neighbors who aren't helping anybody but are just getting in there for their own entertainment. Everybody, you want to yell at Pete for taking advantage of Maggie, for abandoning her, for treating her poorly. Like, everybody in this book is awful or dumb or, they're really, really aggravating. And the thing is, this is a book that is really, really designed to be realistic about some of the bleakest parts of humanity, the emptiest parts of humanity. Because the thing is that as awful and horrendous as, say, Nazis are, the thing about Nazis is that there is this overwhelming, overarching drive in them. There are aspects of it that you could theoretically call commendable, in that you are talking about the ambition to do a thing, to do a remarkable thing. To borrow a phrase from Harry Potter, things that are terrible but great. And this book is things that are terrible but not great. It's sort of like it's the bleakest part of humanity, because this is all small evils built one on top of another instead of great evils, instead of something that is impressive and the kind of thing you look at and say, if we turned to this, we could uplift all of humanity, but instead you've turned your genius to horrible things. These are people who would never have uplifted humanity in any way. They're just people who managed to drag it down just that smidgen further than otherwise. And I can understand why, at the turn of the last century, at the end of the 19th century, this would have made people scream. It would have made people scream to be writing about something as morally bankrupt as this, but it also would have made them scream to write something that is as hopeless as this is, because this is a story that it feels ultimately hopeless, like there's no point. It's just so horrifically empty in its way. And I think that's all that I'm going to say about this, because I'm out of time, and I will see you all next week for something more cheerful.